In this video, we're going to look at some DC Comics Golden Age first appearances, but they're all from the 1950s. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Follow us on Instagram at Bronzeville_comics, on Whatnot at Bronzeville_comics, where we do sales every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. In the description of this video is a link that you can sign on to Whatnot. If you've not yet done so, it'll get you $10 off your first purchase. Also, there is a link to my eBay store as well as my email. So, I find the early 1950s, the late golden age, or as some people might refer to it as the atomic age of comics, very interesting. Superheroes were dwindling, and most, for DC Comics especially, I mean, Marvel already done. They did have kind of a last gasp in the mid-50s. The timely characters, Fawcett and Quality were still kind of chugging along with the Captain Marvel titles, and Dollman was still being published over at Quality, but they would soon run their course. And of course, Quality and Fawcett characters were subsequently purchased by DC. Plastic Man was still going over there as well. Whereas most of the DC characters, the Justice Society members, the Flashes, Green Lantern, Hawkman, Atom, Dr. Midnight, some are already gone, Hourman, Spectre, Dr. Fate, were already out of the scene. And by the early 1950s, only a handful of superheroes remained being published by DC Comics: Superman, Batman and Robin, Wonder Woman, Superboy, and as backup features, Green Arrow with Speedy and Aquaman. But there were some new characters that came onto the scene in the 1950s, and some of these have stayed around for the long term in DC Comics and become an important part of DC lore over the past 70 years. So we're going to be looking at books that came out between 1950 and 1955. This is my personal list. I have one of the comics on the list. I wanted to include a couple extras. I would like to eventually have all of these, but we can see they are somewhat pricey and somewhat rare. So we're going to take a look at the fair market value, and I kind of used a 5.0 mid-grade as what I was looking at, but there aren't always a lot of sales. As we'll see, these books, there aren't a lot of them out there, because you're also talking about the seduction of the innocent period where the comics code came into existence right at the very tail end of the golden age. Some people consider when comics code stamps started being put on comics as the beginning of the silver age. Other people showcase 4, the first appearance of the Flash. Other people, Fantastic Four #1. But certainly from a deep sea perspective, which is what this video is about, we're just going to look at 1950 to 1955 in terms of cover date. Some of these were under the comic code auspices and others were not, as DC also was experimenting with different formats. I did not include, there were #1s, especially romance comics, that are fairly pricey. There were some Western comics that there were some first appearances, but none of the major Western heroes that have remained used by DC. So we're going to jump into this list. Again, I would love to have all 11 of these books eventually. I think they're all great books to have, and they're all hard to find. So let's jump in and take a look. Now, I'm going to take this list in ascending order by the value of the books. So we're going to start at number 11. This is the one book I do have a copy of. My copy is, I think, missing the back cover. It's poor, but it is a fun book to have. It's Strange Adventures, #9, the first appearance of Captain Comet from 1951. And in about a 5.0, it has approximately $500 value. We see the last sale of a 5.5 was $560. A 6.0 jumps up to $1,000 in terms of its most recent sale. But again, this is not a book that sells a lot. There are only 127 universal copies on the census. And if you even want to be in the top 25%, a 7.0 will put you in there in the top quartile of books. So again, I like to take a look at the census data of these books to see how rare they are. And most of the graded copies are in the 5.5 to the 4 to 6.5 range, but we do even have copies all the way down to a 0.5 graded. and even a 1.8 a year ago sold for $153. So the book does have value. It is a hard book to find. You do have this great Carmine Infantino cover. He also did the art, and this is a style that's much closer to the style that Infantino would use on the Flash just a few years later, as opposed to some of his Golden Age work, which is a little bit cruder and much more of its time. And Captain Comet's a character that has appeared frequently in DC Comics over time. He was prominently featured in the Secret Society of Supervillains in the 70s, which was really my first interaction with him. And then he's been used in a lot of these space-based stories. I think because he does have connections to Ran and Adam Strange and Thanagar and Hawkman, the Omega Men. I think he's not a bad spec character. I think we will see him. I think there's a chance we'll see him at some point in James Gunn's DC universe. So just the one book on the list that I have, and I do kind of want to upgrade. I'd like these books approximately in that 5.0. But as we can see, they're going to get more and more expensive. Let's go to number 10. Number 10 is a bit of a triple key, and that's Brave and the Bold #1 from 1955. So just the very tail end of the Golden Age. And it is the first appearance of the Golden Gladiator, the Silent Knight, and the Viking Prince. The one of these that's had the most staying power is the Viking Prince. I think his story was done by Joe Kubert. And Golden Gladiator was Russ Heath. And I think Herb Novik did the Silent Knight, if I'm not mistaken. We could see a 5.0. We have no sales above a 7.0 for this book. 5.0 sold a year ago for $620. I put the FMV at about $600. 135 universal copies. So similar to the Strange Adventures book. And I think this does have collectability because there are a few people, not a lot, but there are a few people who are trying to collect the Brave and the Bold run. It is a fun run to collect. I have a lot of it. I don't have this one. I do. Once I get past the 3 Justice League issues, maybe I'll look at getting a few more of these. As for Suicide Squad, has for Silver Age Hawkman, before it started becoming a team-up book with different characters, and eventually a Batman team-up book through its end with issue number 200. But the Golden Gladiator only lasted 6 issues. The problem with these characters, Golden Gladiator is set in ancient Rome, the Silent Knight in Arthurian England, and the Viking Prince is a Viking of around 1000 AD. He's the character that's been seen the most over time in DC, and he's been seen in a couple of the animated projects. He was, I believe, in a Justice League Unlimited episode, but you basically have to have time travel stories to incorporate these characters. So they're not characters we see a lot of, and I think it would be a stretch to see them in live action. But it is Brave and the Bold. I'm just a fun book, and I do love that trade dress. That just kind of fun little trade dress, much different than what it would eventually become. Let's go to number 9 on the list. And number 9 is a book that is of similar value, although it's a little bit older, and it is a major character's first appearance. It's Superboy number 10 from 1950, and it's the first appearance of Lana Lang. And for me, this book is tremendously undervalued, at least at what it sold for most recently at the 5.0. I mean, back in 2020, $400. A 4.5 sold for $527 within the last year, but we do see like a $1,200 sale for a 4.0. And again, let's look at this. Look at the census count of this. 75 universal copies on the census. And very few high grade. If you want to get in the top 25%, you're looking at a 6.5. And Lana Lang is a major character. We've seen her portrayed on screen over and over and over again. By Annette O'Toole, by Kristen Kreuk. She's in the current Superman and Lois series. She was in the Superboy syndicated series. She is a very omnipresent character in the Superman mythos. And she was certainly a prominent character through the end of the Golden Age, well through the Silver Age, as Superboy's girlfriend, essentially. So I think, again, it doesn't sell too often. We do see, they gave a fair market value of $4,500. very few sales within the last year. I think the only sale within the last year is a 4.5 for $527. So this is a book I'd love to have, but man, there aren't going to be many of them out there. And I would have to think there aren't many graded, but I have to think Superboy, the Mage, as opposed to some like Strange Adventures or Brave and the Bold, Superboy was a book that people bought, I think, more often back in 1950. But again, this is very early Golden Age, very hard to find. Let's go to number 8 on the list. And this is where the list starts getting rough. And it's Adventures of Rex the Wonder Dog, number 8, the first appearance of Rex the Wonder Dog, with art by Carmine Infantino and Alex Toth, a 5.0. I put a fair market value of 5.0 at about $1,200 because we had this $1,300 sale, $1,300 FMV for a 5.5. It's kind of hard. I mean, there's no sales in the last year. There are 27 universal copies on the census. I mean, that's like Action Comics #1 type numbers. A very overlooked book, a very hard to find book. I actually, I think there was there a raw copy of this on Heritage tonight? I'm recording this Sunday night, but Rex the Wonder Dog hasn't been around too much, but we're going to come back to Rex in just a few minutes. And let's go to number 7 on the list, staying in the doghouse. We're going to go to Batman 92 and the first appearance of Ace the Bat Hound, character that we saw in the Super Pets animated movie. He was pretty omnipresent in this late Golden Age, early Silver Age. This is a book from 1955. It is a Batman book. And that's where things change. A Batman book, with or without a first appearance of Ace the Bat Hound, is going to have intrinsic value. Ace bumps it up a little bit. A 5.0 has a fair market value of about $1,500, where if we went to issue 91, which doesn't have Ace or any other key significance, a 5.0 is only about, what would we say, $400. So Ace does kind of pick that book up a little bit. Quite a bit, actually. Probably Ace is probably worth $1,000 just in and of himself. Ace also may or may not be in Batman Beyond. Bruce Wayne does have a canine companion, but there are much more of these on the census. 220, but hard to get in high grade. If you want to be in the top 25% of census, you only need a 5.5 of this book. So that is, people actively collect Batman as opposed to even Superboy or, the other titles we've talked about, which are more rare. And that's kind of one of the things that we have to compare in this thing is the number of copies on the census. That doesn't mean that there aren't a bunch of raw copies of Adventures of Rex the Wonder Dog #1, but there probably aren't a lot out there. And because I don't think most people would recognize that as being a key other than it having an issue #1. So just a really cool book. Do certainly want that in the collection, as well as the next book, another Batman book. We're going to number 6 on the list. This I put at a fair market value of about $2,000, and it's Batman number 59, the first appearance of Deadshot. A little bit different than the character that we would get in the Suicide Squad later on. Will Smith played him in that first movie. We can see a year ago there was a sale of $1,800, and there are quite a few sales of this book. This is a book that is from 1950, so it's a lot earlier than the Ace book, but about the same number of universal copies on the census, 221. And if we look at, a 9.6 recently sold for $56,000 and a 7.0 for $5,700, and a 4.0 for $1,400. So this book does trade hands. I think that this book, again, is going to have more value for just being a early double-digit Batman than necessarily the first appearance of Deadshot. Let's take a look at the previous issue, what it goes for. We had a 5.0 with a fair market value. I put it about $2,000. If we go to issue number 58, which does have a cool cover, $1,200, right? $1,300. So yes, the first appearance of Deadshot does mean quite a bit. It probably almost doubles the value of the book. Let's go to number 5 on my list. And we return to Adventures of Rex the Wonder Dog, issue number 4, the first appearance of Detective Chimp. Again, look at this. Universal, 29 copies on the census. 29. I mean, just by comparison, I just want to see. 29 Universal copies. Whereas if we look at Action Comics 1, and it's about the same for Adventures of Rex the Wonder Dog number 1. How many Universal copies of Action 1 are out there? Obviously, a book that 44. So there's fewer copies of this than Action Comics 1 on the census. I like this book. I want to get this book for a deal. There was one on Heritage tonight that was part of a lot that was going, and let me just Rex, oops, the Wonder Dog lot. I think it's sold tonight. Here we go. There we go. Recent sales. Maybe it's still up for auction. Here it is. Sold for $2,400. This lot. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, I did bid on it. About a third of that. That's $2,400 with the buyer's premium. A pretty nice looking copy of number 4. Does have some, damage down here on the bottom. I'm not going to sign in for high-res images, but you can see that it does have issues 2, 3, 4, and 7 to 10. And it has an overstreet value of $775. It went for $2,400. People who know, I think, want the first appearance of Detective Chimp because he is a member of the Justice League Dark, and I've said it forever. I think that a really good chance we're going to see James Gunn use Detective Chimp. He disappeared from the stage for a long time, and then came back. I'm not exactly sure when he made his return, but again, he's been in the Justice League Dark, and was he in the Swamp Thing run? Hold on a minute. We're back. And he was a backup in Rex the Wonder Dog until 1959, so into the Silver Age. And he then disappeared, would next appear in a DC Comics Presents when they had a backup feature, Whatever Happened To, and one of the Whatever Happened To's was Detective Chimp. He came back to prominence, really appeared here and there, but in 2005 in the Days of Vengeance storyline. So, yeah, I think this for me is a little bit of a spec book, but again, 29 copies on the census, really hard to find. Let us go to number 4 on my list. And this is another book. I've actually seen this book, but it's really low grade at a show. There's a guy who's had it, and it is Phantom Stranger number 1 from 1952. A few more copies on the census, 97. If you want to get into the top 25%, you only need a 5.0. I estimated the value of a 3.0 at, or a 5.0 at about $3,000. The last sale in 2021 for $3,000. We could see a $780 sale for a 2.5 and an $840 sale for a 1.8. So I've seen this in low grade at a local show a number of times. Price hasn't, I want ideally something more in that 5.0 range, but you can see only 97 on the census, a hard book to come by. And I don't even think you can find one on eBay right now. Let's go to number 3 on the list. And this is a major key, and I'm surprised it isn't a little bit higher, much like Lana Lang. And that is Detective Comics 225 from 1955. Very, very tail end of the golden age. First appearance of Martian Manhunter. Some people actually consider this the first book of the Silver Age because Martian Manhunter kind of introduced the characters who would make up the Justice League. There are 295 on the census, so there are plenty of them. 5.5 if you want to get in the top 25%. A 5.0 fair market value of about $4,000. We did have a sale of a 3.5 at $3,000 and a 6.0 at $6,600. So about $1,000 a grade point, is pretty accurate. Maybe this is a little closer to 5,000. Highest graded is a single 9.4 and then 2 9.0s and 8.5. So only 4 copies, 8.5 or better. Again, this does suffer, as most of these do. I think if we go back, only Ace the Bat Hound, Captain Comet, obviously Rex the Wonder Dog and Phantom Stranger, and the 3 Brave and the Bold characters were on the cover. Detective Chimp was not on the cover. Lana Lang is not on the cover. And Deadshot is not on the cover. So, and neither is John Jones. So I think he is heralded up at the top here, new feature. But I think that hurts him. But this is a character that is a huge part of the Silver Age of comics, was a stalwart member of the Justice League of America for many years, disappeared through the 70s. So when I was reading comics as a kid, he wasn't around. Only read him in the reprints in the 100 pages of Justice League. And then he did come back in the early 1980s and has been an important character in DC since, was a huge part of Justice League Unlimited. We did see him very briefly in live action in the Snyder Cut. We saw him used a lot, but because of, I think, the constraints of the CGI, not really to full effect as a supporting character in the Supergirl TV series. But I think this is a character we're going to see. We are going to see more of it. I can't see James Gunn not using the Martian Manhunter. Let's go to number 2 on the list. And our third dog on the list, it is Adventure Comics 210, the first appearance of Crypto, the Superdog. From 1955, he was the pet of Superboy, much more so at this point in time than hanging around with Superman. See a 5.0. I had it at a fair market value of about $5,000 because you did have a 5.5 that just sold for $6,850. There are 160 copies on the census. So not as much as the Martian Manhunter. So it is, there are fewer copies, but it's a little more expensive, which is kind of interesting. I would imagine that in circulation somewhere that there wouldn't be far fewer copies raw of this book than the Martian Manhunter book. Crypto's on the cover, which is a major plus for this character's first appearance. And I mean, he's had his own TV series. He starred in the Super Pets movie, and he has been used in live action. So interested to see if there's going to be any hints of him in Superman Legacy. But, this is a major first appearance, and especially for dog lovers like Crypto. And let's go to the most expensive book on the list. And it's kind of quasi first appearance, and it's really expensive book because it does have a great cover. And it is Detective Comics 168 from 1951, the first appearance of the Red Hood, who's actually the Joker. And this is kind of, sort of, a little bit the origin story of the Joker. A 5.0 has a fair market value of about $17,000. Very expensive comic book. I mean, the Red Hood featured wonderfully and prominently on the cover of the book. Only 150 universal copies on the census, which is more than some of these books. It is early in the 1950s, February of 51. And so to be in the top 25%, you need a 6.5. So there are some higher mid-grade copies, I would say, out there. But yeah, this is a very popular book because it is a Batman book. It is related to the Joker, who's probably the most popular supervillain character there is, certainly in DC, if not in all of comics. So that is our big number one, and a very difficult book to get, because, and then when it does come up, there are a lot of collectors that really want this book. So there you go. That's the top 11 list, so to speak, of books from the early 1950s. Some harder to find books. We saw by those census counts that some of them are quite scarce, but it might mean that they're out there somewhere in raw condition. And certainly some of the books, like, if they're not main titles, The Strange Adventures, Your Rex, The Wonder Dogs, even Brave and the Bold and Phantom Stranger, are not going to be recognized by very casual collectors or dealers. So I keep holding out hope that I'm going to come across one of those in the wild. But, you never know what you're going to find. It's unlikely, but, sometimes you get books from that era, and it would, could be there. The problem is books this old, you certainly got to do your page count on it. Make sure everything is there, and condition is so variable. So I'd like to thank you all for stopping by. Let me know what you think of this list. Let me know if you have any of these books, and any of these books that you would want to have in your collection. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying, until next time, enjoy your comics.